The world doesn't punish the relentless, it rewards them. While most people comfort themselves with fairy tales about karma, justice, and the inherent goodness of hard work, the relentless understand a fundamental truth that separates winners from wishful thinkers. Results matter more than intentions. Power matters more than principles, and effectiveness matters more than ethics. This isn't cynicism speaking, it's reality. Look around you at the people who control resources, make decisions, and shape outcomes. They didn't get there by being the nicest, the most moral, or the most fair. They got there by being the most effective, the most strategic, and yes, the most relentless in pursuing their objectives. The false belief that justice and goodness guarantee advancement is perhaps the most expensive delusion people carry. This belief keeps them passive when they should be aggressive, fair when they should be strategic, and moral when they should be practical. They wait for recognition that never comes. Expect fairness in systems designed to benefit the powerful, and trust that good intentions will somehow translate into good outcomes. Meanwhile, the relentless understand that justice is something the powerful define after they've already won. Goodness is a luxury you can afford once you've secured your position. Fairness is a concept that benefits those who are already losing and need the game to slow down. Niccolo Machiavelli serves as our guide, not because he advocated for evil, but because he advocated for effectiveness. In The Prince, he didn't teach cruelty for its own sake. He taught strategic thinking for survival and victory. He understood that in a world where everyone else is playing to win, playing by different rules isn't noble, it's stupid. Machiavelli recognized that power is not given, it is taken. Respect is not earned through virtue, it is commanded through strength. Loyalty is not inspired through kindness, it is secured through strategic benefit and controlled consequences. These aren't comfortable truths, but they are useful truths. The relentless mind doesn't operate from a place of hatred or malice. It operates from a place of clarity. It sees the world as it actually is rather than as it should be. It understands that while everyone else is debating ethics, results are being distributed to those who focus on effectiveness. This is about survival in its most sophisticated form. Not physical survival, but social, professional, and economic survival in systems that pretend to reward merit while actually rewarding strategy. It's about understanding that the people who control your opportunities, your income, and your future are not making decisions based on what's fair. They're making decisions based on what serves their interests. The choice before you is simple. Continue operating under the illusion that the world rewards goodness, or develop the strategic mindset that actually gets rewarded. Continue waiting for fairness in unfair systems, or learn to create advantages in systems designed to benefit the already powerful. The relentless mind isn't born, it's developed through understanding, practice, and the disciplined application of strategic principles that most people are too comfortable or too naive to master. Today we explore what separates those who control outcomes from those who hope for them. Fairness serves as a psychological collar that keeps people predictable and vulnerable, while they wait for rewards that will never come through fairness alone. The concept of fairness is weaponized against people who could otherwise compete effectively, convincing them to limit their own strategic options while their competitors face no such limitations. Think about it. Who benefits most from everyone else playing fair? The people who are already winning. They want the rules stable, the competition predictable, and everyone else limited to strategies that won't threaten existing power structures. Fairness becomes their protection against disruption, innovation, and aggressive competition. The most successful individuals and organizations throughout history didn't build their empires through fair play. They built them through strategic advantage, superior positioning, and yes, relentless pursuit of objectives regardless of whether competitors considered their methods fair. They understood that fairness is what you advocate for when you're losing and what you abandon when you're winning. This doesn't mean being randomly cruel or unnecessarily harmful. It means recognizing that in competitive environments, which includes most areas of professional and economic life, the objective is to win, not to be liked by your competitors. The objective is to create outcomes that serve your interests, not to maintain everyone's comfort with your methods. History consistently demonstrates that empires, fortunes, and power structures are built through advantage, not through fair play. The Romans didn't conquer through fairness. They conquered through superior strategy, better logistics, and overwhelming force applied at decisive moments. Modern corporations don't dominate markets through fairness. They dominate through better products, superior marketing, strategic acquisitions, and sometimes aggressive competitive practices. The world respects results, not intentions, because results change circumstances while intentions remain invisible. You can have the best intentions in the world, but if you can't deliver outcomes, those intentions become irrelevant. You can be the most moral person in the room, but if you can't influence decisions, your morality has no practical impact. Results demonstrate competence, reliability, and power. Intentions demonstrate nothing more than what you wish you could accomplish. The gap between intentions and results is filled by strategy, resources, and relentless execution, not by hoping others will recognize your good heart. This recognition doesn't require abandoning all moral considerations, but it does require prioritizing effectiveness over comfort, results over approval, and strategic thinking over wishful thinking. It means asking not, what would the ideal person do, but what does this situation actually require for the outcome I need? The illusion of justice keeps people passive in situations where aggression would serve them, fair in situations where strategic advantage would benefit them, and morale in situations where practical thinking would advance them. It's a form of voluntary limitation that serves everyone except the person limiting themselves. Breaking free from this illusion doesn't mean becoming randomly aggressive or abandoning all ethical considerations. It means becoming strategically minded about when fairness serves your interests and when it doesn't, when morality advances your objectives and when it limits them, when justice helps your position and when it hurts it. The relentless mindset is not about gratuitous cruelty or random aggression. It's about clarity of purpose and disciplined pursuit of objectives without the hesitation that destroys opportunities and the naive morality that creates vulnerabilities. Most people confuse ruthlessness with cruelty, but they're entirely different concepts. Cruelty is harm for its own sake, often driven by emotion, ego, or psychological dysfunction. Ruthlessness is the willingness to do what situations require for the outcomes you need, regardless of whether others approve of your methods or consider them fair. Cruelty is often counterproductive. Ruthlessness is strategically necessary. The relentless mind accepts that hesitation and naive morality cost opportunities, resources, and positioning that may never return. In competitive environments, the window for effective action is often narrow, while others are debating ethics, calculating social approval, or waiting for perfect conditions. Opportunities disappear and advantages shift to competitors who act decisively. This doesn't mean acting impulsively or without consideration of consequences. It means acting based on strategic calculation rather than emotional comfort, on objective assessment rather than social approval, on long-term positioning rather than short-term likability. The fundamental question shifts from, how can I win while being universally liked and approved of, to simply, how can I win? This shift eliminates enormous amounts of psychological friction and strategic limitation. Instead of trying to find solutions that make everyone happy, which usually means solutions that are suboptimal for everyone, you focus on finding solutions that actually work. Most people exhaust themselves trying to find perfect solutions that serve everyone's interests, maintain everyone's comfort, and preserve everyone's opinion of them. This is strategically expensive because perfect solutions rarely exist, and the effort to find them usually results in delayed action, compromised effectiveness, and missed opportunities. The relentless mind recognizes that in competitive situations, serving everyone's interests usually means serving no one's interests effectively. Making everyone comfortable usually means making no one truly satisfied. Preserving everyone's approval usually means accomplishing nothing significant. This mindset requires accepting that effective action often creates discomfort, resistance, and disapproval from people whose comfort and approval are less important than your objectives. It requires understanding that leadership often involves making decisions others don't like, taking actions others wouldn't choose, and bearing responsibility for outcomes others couldn't handle. The clarity that comes with relentless thinking eliminates the psychological paralysis that affects most people in competitive or high-stakes situations. When you're not constantly calculating social approval or trying to find solutions that hurt no one's feelings, you can focus entirely on what actually works. This focus creates enormous competitive advantages because while others are managing emotions, opinions, and social dynamics, you're managing resources, positioning, and results. While others are trying to make everyone happy, you're trying to make things work. While others are debating ideal outcomes, you're creating actual outcomes. Strategic cruelty is not a vice, but a necessity when properly understood and precisely applied. This paradox confuses people who think in absolutes rather than contexts, who believe that cruelty is always wrong, rather than understanding that strategic precision sometimes requires actions that appear cruel to observers but serve larger objectives. The key distinction is precision versus explosion, patience versus reactivity. Strategic cruelty is surgical. It targets specific problems with calculated force to prevent larger conflicts, more extensive damage, or ongoing instability. Emotional cruelty is explosive. It vents frustration without strategic purpose and usually creates more problems than it solves. When properly applied, one decisive action can prevent multiple future conflicts, eliminate ongoing sources of instability, and establish clear boundaries that prevent testing behavior. This is more humane than allowing situations to fester, problems to compound, and conflicts to multiply over time. Consider organizational leadership. A manager who fires an incompetent employee quickly saves the team from months of frustration, missed deadlines, and declining morale. The firing appears cruel to observers who don't understand the full context, but it prevents greater suffering for more people over longer periods. The same principle applies to personal relationships, business partnerships, and competitive situations. Sometimes the kindest long-term action requires short-term decisiveness that appears harsh but prevents extended suffering, ongoing conflict, or gradual deterioration that would ultimately hurt everyone involved. Strategic cruelty requires emotional control and objective assessment. You're not acting from anger, frustration, or personal offense. You're acting from calculated understanding that certain situations require decisive intervention to prevent worse outcomes. The action serves strategic purpose rather than emotional release. This approach also requires accurate assessment of when such measures are necessary. Not every problem requires dramatic intervention. Not every conflict needs decisive resolution. Not every relationship needs immediate termination. The ability to distinguish between situations that require strategic force and situations that can be resolved through other means is crucial. Timing becomes critical in strategic applications. Acting too early appears unnecessarily aggressive and may provoke resistance that could have been avoided. Acting too late allows problems to compound and may require more extensive intervention than would have been necessary with better timing. The most effective application of strategic cruelty often involves creating conditions where the necessary outcome appears inevitable rather than imposed. Instead of directly firing someone, you might restructure responsibilities so that their incompetence becomes obvious to everyone. Instead of directly ending a partnership, you might withdraw support so that the partnership becomes unsustainable naturally. This approach achieves the necessary strategic outcome while minimizing resistance, resentment, and retaliation. People accept inevitable outcomes more easily than imposed outcomes, even when the practical effect is identical. The paradox resolves when you understand that avoiding necessary strategic actions often leads to greater cruelty over longer periods. Allowing incompetent people to remain in positions where they fail publicly is more cruel than removing them quickly. Allowing failing relationships to deteriorate slowly is more cruel than ending them decisively. Rivals should not be wounded, but eliminated completely from their ability to threaten your position. And this elimination must happen with absolute control over timing and method. Half measures in competitive environments usually create more problems than they solve, because wounded opponents often become more dangerous than undamaged ones. When someone poses a genuine threat to your position, resources, or objectives, the strategic response is complete neutralization of their ability to continue threatening you. This doesn't necessarily mean personal destruction, but it does mean eliminating their capacity to damage your interests effectively. Wounded opponents have nothing left to lose, which makes them unpredictable and potentially more dangerous. They also have grievances that motivate revenge-seeking behavior. Complete elimination of their threatening capacity removes both the ability and, ideally, the motivation for future opposition. This principle applies across different contexts with different methods. In professional environments, it might mean ensuring that someone who has tried to undermine you loses credibility so completely that future attempts to undermine you won't be taken seriously. In business, it might mean acquiring a competitor rather than simply outcompeting them temporarily. The key is understanding that competitive threats rarely disappear on their own. They usually require deliberate, strategic action to neutralize. Hoping that threats will lose interest, find other targets, or simply give up is usually wishful thinking that allows problems to compound over time. Control over timing and method is essential, because reactive responses are usually less effective than proactive ones. When you respond to attacks, you're operating on your opponent's timeline and responding to their initiative. When you choose the timing and method of confrontation, you control the conditions and maximize your advantages. This control allows you to act when your position is strongest, when your opponent is most vulnerable, when conditions favor your approach, and when you have maximum resources available. It also allows you to choose methods that minimize collateral damage, reduce the likelihood of retaliation, and achieve decisive results. The presence of visible strength often maintains peace more effectively than demonstrations of that strength. When people understand that opposing you would be costly and ultimately unsuccessful, most will choose not to oppose you at all. This understanding comes from reputation, demonstrated capability, and visible resources rather than from constant conflict. Strategic deterrence works when potential opponents can calculate the likely costs and outcomes of confrontation and realize that those costs exceed any potential benefits. This calculation requires that your strength be visible enough to assess but not so aggressively displayed that it provokes unnecessary conflicts. The most sophisticated approach involves creating conditions where opposing you becomes strategically irrational for your potential opponents. This might involve controlling resources they need, maintaining relationships they value, or positioning yourself so that attacking you would damage their own interests significantly. Whoever controls the story controls perception, and whoever controls perception controls reality for practical purposes. Most people dramatically underestimate the importance of narrative in shaping outcomes because they focus on facts while others focus on interpretation of those facts. The same action can be perceived as leadership or tyranny, innovation or recklessness, strategic thinking or cold manipulation, depending entirely on how the story is told, by whom it's told, and in what context it's presented. The person who controls the narrative controls which interpretation becomes widely accepted. This control must be established before actions are taken, not as damage control afterward. Once someone else's narrative becomes established, changing it requires much more effort and is often less effective. Prevention is more efficient than correction in narrative management. Shaping your actions so they appear inevitable and justified requires understanding how others will interpret those actions and preparing the interpretive framework in advance. This might involve establishing your expertise in relevant areas, building relationships with key influencers, or creating conditions that make your actions appear to be natural responses to circumstances. When actions appear inevitable, they generate less resistance because people don't fight against what seems to be natural consequences of existing conditions. When actions appear justified, they generate less resentment because people understand the reasoning behind them, even if they don't like the outcomes. The difference between an action appearing as tyranny versus leadership often depends entirely on whether people understand the reasoning, see the necessity, and perceive the actor as competent to make such decisions. These perceptions can be influenced through strategic narrative management. Action without narrative becomes raw power, which provokes resistance and resentment. People resist being controlled But they often accept being led when they understand the direction and reasoning. The same outcome achieved through different narrative frameworks generates completely different emotional and practical responses. Narrative control also involves timing the release of information strategically. Not all relevant information needs to be shared immediately. Some information is more powerful when revealed at specific moments. Some information is more effective when others discover it themselves, rather than being told directly. The most sophisticated narrative control involves creating conditions where others draw the conclusions you want them to reach through their own reasoning, rather than through your direct persuasion. When people feel they've reached conclusions independently, they defend those conclusions more strongly and resist alternative interpretations more effectively. This approach requires understanding your audience deeply enough to predict how they'll interpret information, what questions they'll ask, what concerns they'll have, and what evidence they'll find convincing. It also requires patience to allow the narrative development process to unfold naturally rather than forcing premature conclusions. Anticipating and molding how opponents will be perceived before taking action against them is perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of strategic thinking, because it determines whether your actions will be seen as justified responses or unprovoked aggression. The person who controls the enemy's image controls the context for conflict. Most people wait until conflict becomes obvious before thinking about how others will perceive the situation. This reactive approach means they're always defending their actions, rather than establishing the framework for interpreting those actions. By the time conflict is visible, narrative advantages have already been distributed. The strategic approach involves establishing your opponent's image as problematic before taking action against them. This might involve highlighting patterns of unreliable behavior, questionable decision-making, or problematic relationships that others have overlooked or ignored. This is not about creating false narratives, but about directing attention to true but previously unnoticed aspects of someone's character or behavior. Every person has both positive and negative qualities, both admirable and questionable behaviors, both strengths and weaknesses. The question is, which aspects receive attention and emphasis? Transforming accusations into humor and discrediting adversaries requires understanding social dynamics and emotional responses. When someone's accusations against you become subjects of amusement rather than concern, those accusations lose their power to damage you. When someone's credibility becomes questionable, their future accusations carry less weight. This transformation often happens by revealing the absurdity, inconsistency, or self-serving nature of accusations. When people see that accusations are motivated by personal interest rather than genuine concern, by emotional reaction rather than objective assessment, or by patterns of similar accusations against multiple targets, the accusations lose credibility. The most effective approach often involves allowing opponents to discredit themselves through their own behavior, rather than attacking them directly. When you respond to unfair accusations with calm professionalism, while your accuser responds with emotional outbursts, observers draw their own conclusions about credibility and character. Making enemies confirm your version of their story requires understanding their psychology well enough to predict their responses to different provocations. When you can predict how someone will react to specific situations, you can create those situations to demonstrate the character traits you want others to notice. This might involve remaining calm in situations where they become emotional, being professional when they become personal, offering reasonable solutions when they make unreasonable demands, or maintaining consistency when they demonstrate inconsistency. The goal is not to hurt them unnecessarily, but to create conditions where their problematic traits become visible to others who might otherwise never notice them. When people see the patterns themselves, they are more likely to trust their own observations than they would trust your descriptions of those patterns. This approach also protects you from appearing vindictive or unfair because you're not attacking them. You're simply creating opportunities for them to demonstrate who they are. The demonstration comes from their choices, not from your accusations. Real power lies in deciding what happens after decisions are made, actions are taken, and outcomes occur. Most people focus on making good decisions without understanding that the power to determine consequences often matters more than the power to make initial choices. When rewards and punishments consistently come from you, People begin making decisions based on how you'll respond rather than on their independent judgment or external standards. This creates a form of psychological influence that extends far beyond formal authority or official position. This doesn't require being the official decision-maker in situations. It requires being the person whose response to decisions significantly affects the outcomes for others. When people know that your approval opens doors, your disapproval creates obstacles, your support provides advantages, and your opposition creates costs. They factor your likely responses into their decision-making processes. Building this influence requires consistency and following through on both positive and negative responses. If you reward behavior you want to encourage but fail to create consequences for behavior you want to discourage, people learn that your stated preferences don't translate into actual outcomes. Making rebellion against your interests unthinkable requires establishing clearly understood costs for opposition that exceed any potential benefits of resistance. This is more effective than trying to prevent people from thinking about opposition, which usually increases their curiosity about it. The key is making the cost-benefit analysis obviously favor cooperation over opposition. When people can clearly see that working with you benefits them more than working against you costs them, and that opposing you costs them more than cooperating with you benefits them, the strategic choice becomes obvious. This calculation must account for both immediate and long-term consequences. Some people will accept short-term costs for long-term benefits. So the long-term costs of opposition must also exceed the long-term benefits. Some people discount future consequences heavily. So immediate consequences must be significant enough to influence present behavior. The most effective consequence systems are often invisible until activated. People understand that consequences exist without experiencing them constantly. This creates an environment where cooperation feels natural and comfortable, while opposition feels risky and uncertain. Consequence mastery also involves understanding different types of motivation for different people. Some respond more to positive incentives, others to negative consequences. Some are motivated by recognition, others by resources, others by access, others by security. The ability to provide different types of consequences allows influence over different types of people. The ultimate goal is creating an environment where people choose to act in ways that serve your interests, because doing so serves their interests better than alternatives do. This is more sustainable than forced compliance because it doesn't require constant monitoring or intervention. Building invisible influence through strategic accumulation of secrets, debts, and dependencies creates sustainable power that doesn't depend on formal authority, official position, or visible resources. The person who understands what others need, what they fear, and what they owe operates from a position of strength regardless of their official status. Secrets provide leverage because people will pay significant costs to prevent embarrassing or damaging information from becoming public. This doesn't mean blackmail or extortion, but it does mean that when someone trusts you with sensitive information, they have strong incentives to maintain positive relationships with you. Debts create obligations that can be called upon when needed. These don't have to be financial debts. They can be favors, introductions, opportunities, or support provided when others needed help. When you consistently help others achieve their objectives, you build a reservoir of goodwill and obligation that becomes available when you need assistance. Dependencies arise when you become valuable enough to others that losing access to your resources, expertise, or connections would create significant problems for them. The more valuable you are to others' success, the more influence you have over their decisions and behavior. The key principle is not reacting in the heat of the moment, but choosing the perfect moment for maximum impact. Emotional reactions are usually suboptimal because they prioritize immediate emotional satisfaction over strategic effectiveness. Strategic responses are usually more effective because they prioritize outcomes over feelings. This requires emotional discipline and strategic patience. When someone does something that triggers immediate anger, disappointment, or frustration, the strategic response is to channel that energy into planning rather than into immediate reaction. The question becomes not, how can I express this feeling, but how can I use this situation to advance my objectives? Perfect timing often involves waiting for moments when your actions will have maximum impact with minimum resistance. This might mean waiting for someone to be in a vulnerable position where they need your help. waiting for public attention to be focused elsewhere, or waiting for conditions that make your actions appear natural and inevitable. One calculated action can often prevent 10 potential betrayals because it demonstrates consequences clearly and memorably. When people see what happens to those who act against your interests, they make different calculations about whether opposing you is worth the risks. This demonstration doesn't have to be dramatic or public. Often, quiet consequences that become known through reputation and informal networks are more effective than public displays because they generate less resistance while still communicating the message clearly. The goal is creating an environment where people think carefully before acting against your interests, where they consider potential consequences before making decisions that might affect you, and where they understand that actions have predictable and proportional responses. Power is the daily maintenance of perception and consequences, not a destination you reach once and then maintain automatically. Every interaction either builds or erodes your influence. Every decision either strengthens or weakens your position. Every response either enhances or diminishes your reputation for strategic thinking and effective action. The comfortable illusion that power structures are fair, that good intentions are rewarded, and that playing by everyone else's rules will somehow lead to success has cost more dreams than any external opposition ever could. It keeps capable people passive when they should be aggressive, reactive when they should be proactive, hopeful when they should be strategic. The harsh reality is that those who refuse to learn strategic thinking, who insist on maintaining naive beliefs about how power actually works, who continue waiting for fairness in fundamentally competitive environments, will be controlled by those who understand these dynamics clearly and apply them consistently. This is not a moral judgment but a practical observation. The world rewards understanding and application of power dynamics, not ignorance of them. The world responds to strategic positioning, not good intentions. The world respects demonstrated capability, not hopeful thinking. The choice before you is straightforward but significant. Continue operating under illusions that feel comfortable but produce disappointing results, or develop the strategic mindset that actually creates the outcomes you want. Continue hoping others will recognize your value without you having to demonstrate power, or learn to build and maintain influence that makes recognition irrelevant. The relentless mind is not born with natural cruelty or inherent aggression. It is developed through understanding reality clearly, accepting how power actually works, and applying strategic principles consistently over time. It is a choice to prioritize effectiveness over comfort, results over approval, and strategic positioning over social acceptance. Every person who has achieved significant influence, built substantial wealth, or created lasting impact has understood these principles at some level. Whether they learned them consciously or developed them intuitively, they understand that power must be built, influence must be maintained, and results must be created through strategic action rather than hoped for through good intentions. The difference between where you are now and where they are is not talent, connections, or luck. It's strategic thinking applied consistently to every interaction, every decision, and every opportunity. It's understanding that every conversation is a chance to build influence. Every conflict is training in strategic response, and every relationship is an opportunity to demonstrate value and create leverage. Your transformation begins with your next decision about how to respond to challenge, competition, or opportunity. Do you react emotionally or respond strategically? Do you hope for fairness or create advantage? Do you wait for recognition or build influence? Do you seek approval or command respect? The relentless mind sees every situation as information about power dynamics, every person as a strategic consideration, every outcome as data about what works and what doesn't. This doesn't make you heartless, it makes you effective. This doesn't make you evil, it makes you strategic. This doesn't make you cruel, it makes you clear about reality. Remember, the world doesn't punish the relentless. It rewards them with the very outcomes that the naive continue hoping to achieve through methods that have never worked and will never work. The question is not whether these principles are fair. The question is whether they are accurate and useful. Your development of strategic thinking, your ability to build and maintain influence, your capacity for making decisions based on effectiveness rather than comfort will determine whether you control your circumstances or your circumstances control you. The choice is entirely yours, but the consequences of that choice are entirely predictable. If you're ready to stop being controlled by people who understand power while you cling to fairness fantasies, then this channel is your training ground. Every week we expose the strategies that separate the powerful from the powerless, the controllers from the controlled. Hit that like button if this opened your eyes to how the game really works. Share this with someone who's still playing by rules that only benefit their competitors. And subscribe because the world isn't going to become more fair. And if you don't master these principles, someone who has will be making your decisions for you. The relentless mind doesn't wait for permission. It takes what it needs to survive and thrive.